All right. So today in our Bible study, we're going to be talking about we're going to be going over Genesis chapter 29, and it's subtitled Jacob meets Rachel. And we're going to go right into it, starting with verse 1 all the way through. It says, "Then Jacob went on his way and came to the land of the people of the east, near Haran. As he looked, he saw a well in the field and three flocks of sheep lying there, be it resting, beside it, because the flocks were watered from that well. Now the stone on the mouth of the well that covered and protected it was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well, water the sheep, and afterward replace the stone on the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, My brothers, where are you from? And they said, We are from Haran. In verse 5 it says, So he said to them, Do you know Laban, the grandson of Nahor, Abraham's brother? And they replied, We know him. And he asked them, Is it well with him? And they said, He is doing well. Look, here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep. And Jacob said, Look, the sun is still high, be it overhead. It is a long time before the flocks need to be gathered in their folds for the night. Water the sheep and go and return them to their pasture. But they said, we can't leave until the flocks are gathered together and the shepherds roll the stone from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. In verse 10, it says, When Jacob saw his cousin Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he came up and rolled a stone away from the mouth of the well and watered the flock of Laban, his uncle, of excuse me, and watered the flock of Laban, his uncle. Then Jacob kissed Rachel in greeting, and he raised his voice and wept. In verse 12, it says, Jacob told Rachel he was her father's relative, Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. When Laban heard of the arrival of Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced and kissed him and brought him to his house. Then he told Laban all these things. In verse 14, it says, Then Laban said to him, You are my bone and my flesh. And Jacob stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, hmm. Then Laban said to Jacob, Just because you are my relative, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Verse 16. Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. So, in other words, to put it quite bluntly, she was a brick house. From top to bottom, she was a looker. Okay. Now, here's a little thing here I want to mention. It says Leah's eyes were weak. What does that mean? Her eyes were weak. Could she not see well? I mean, really. So I did a little digging on that. Okay, Leah's eyes were weak. Now, let me see. Let's see here. Leah's eyes were weak. Okay. Leah's eyes were weak. I'm trying to get. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the meaning of weak eyes, it meant in the ancient Near East, appearance was a big factor in marriage arrangements. So Rachel's beauty gave her favor with Jacob, while Leah, though she was the older daughter, was overshadowed, right? So eyes in Hebrew thought were not just organs of sight, but symbols of vitality and life and inner strength. So a description of weak eyes could suggest, or did suggest rather, that Leah did not have the same outwardly captivating presence that Rachel had. See, it meant that Leah's eyes lacked brightness or sparkle, making her less attractive compared to Rachel. In ancient times, eyes were often seen as the defining feature of beauty. And I also look at it this way. I use myself as an example. When I look at pictures of myself when I was in my 30s, I had more of a sparkle to my eyes than I do now. When you're younger, you have a more of a vibrant look, which is why um in comparison to being younger and versus older. Now with this situation right here, it wasn't the fact that she was older, which makes it more of a telling statement, because it said her eyes just wasn't as vibrant or had that sparkle, so therefore it made her look less attractive. I hope I broke that down good enough for you. So the Hebrew phrasing sets up a comparison. Leah is described in a subdued way. Her eyes were weak, while Rachel is praised more strongly, beautiful in form and appearance. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean Leah was ugly, but the writer is highlighting that Rachel stood out in physical beauty. But it's interesting that though Jacob favored Rachel, God chose Leah to be the mother of Judah, the tribe from which Jesus descended. And this shows that while man looks at outward appearance, God values what he sees as significance for his plan. And of course, being human, being a man, we're gonna go by the outward appearance first. I mean, it's just how it is, and then and then hope for the best afterwards. We just tend to fall that way. Not every man, but the majority do. Okay, continue reading here. Where was I? Let's see. Oh, verse 18. Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you as a hired workman for 7 years in return for the privilege of marrying Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her in marriage to you than give her to another man. Stay and work with me. So Jacob served Laban for 7 years for the right to marry Rachel. But they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Talking about 7 years now. But Laban's treachery. So in verse 21, it says, finally, Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time of service is completed, so that I may take her to me as my wife. So Laban gathered together all the men of the place and prepared a wedding, a feast with wine. But in the evening he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob went in to consummate the marriage with her. Laban also gave Zilpah, his maid, to his daughter Leah as a maid. But in the morning, when Jacob awoke, it was Leah who was with him. And he said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? Did I not work for you for 7 years? For Rachel? Why have you deceived and betrayed me like this? But Laban only said, it is not the tradition here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older. Finish the week of the wedding feast for Leah, then we will give you Rachel also. In return, you shall work for me for 7 more years. So we're talking a totality of 14 years. Wow. 14 years. So Jacob complied and fulfilled Leah's week of celebration. And then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as his second wife. Laban also gave Bilhah, his maid, to his daughter Rachel as a maid. So Jacob consummated his marriage and lived with Rachel as his wife. And he loved Rachel more than Leah and served with Laban for another 7 years. Now, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he made her able to bear children, but Rachel was barren. See the twist in that right there? Leah conceived and gave birth to a son and named him Reuben. For she said, because the Lord has seen my humiliation and suffering, now my husband will love me, since I have given him a son. In verse 33, it says, then she conceived again and gave birth to a son and said, because the Lord heard that I am unloved, he has given me this son also. So she named him Simeon, which means God hears. In verse 34, she conceived again and gave birth to a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me as a companion, for I have given him 3 sons. And by the way, my wife gave me 3 sons. Also, the Lord has given me 3 sons, even more succinctly. Therefore, he was named Levi. In verse 35, again, she conceived and gave birth to a 4th son. And she said, now I will praise the Lord. So she named him Judah. Then for a time, she stopped bearing children. Let's stop right there. Okay, so let's unpack things right here. Okay, let's unpack things. So here's a breakdown of Genesis chapter 29, both the significance of it and I give you a behind the scenes look also. I like doing that. So Genesis chapter 29 recounts Jacob's journey to Padan Aram, where he meets his uncle Laban's family. And the key events can include number one, Jacob arrives at a well, meets shepherds, and is introduced to Rachel. Then he falls in love with Rachel and agrees to serve Laban 7 years for her hand in marriage. After the 7 years, Laban deceives Jacob by giving him Leah, the older sister, instead of Rachel. See, he he didn't want Leah at all, but that's what happened. Okay, and he pretty much felt like he had to stick with that. And Jacob agrees to work another 7 years to marry Rachel as well. And then the chapter closes with with God's compassion toward Leah, granting her children while Rachel remains barren at that time. And then we have the significance in this storyline. Then we have the significance in this story. See, there's a covenant continuity here also. Jacob, heir to Abraham's promise, begins to establish his own household here. And through Leah and Rachel, and later their maidservants, the 12 tribes of Israel are birthed. And even in deception, God uses circumstances to shape Jacob's destiny. And Leah, the unwanted wife, becomes the mother of Judah, the tribe from which David and ultimately Jesus comes from. Then we have themes of reaping and sowing, meaning that there's a comeback around to, or what like people like to say today, karma. We can take that to another level also, but I'll leave that there. See, Jacob, who deceived his brother Esau, remember that? And father Isaac in earlier chapters, is himself deceived by Laban. See, it comes back around. And this measure for measure justice is a biblical theme highlighting God's sovereignty. Like I said, he and his mother deceived the father, his mother being Rebecca, and now the same thing is being put back on him, the deception. And the contrast between Jacob's love for Rachel and neglect of Leah sets up tensions that ripple through their children's relationships. And Joseph's story is later tied to this favoritism. So here's some behind the scene. So here's some behind the scenes and historical insights. See, marriage customs in that time it was customary for the older daughter to be married before the younger, and Laban uses this cultural expectation to justify deceiving Jacob. And isn't that how things are done? Whereas we do something wrong and we come up with ways to justify what we've done, right? Think about it. And then instead of paying a traditional dowry, Jacob offers 7 years of labor, which is an unusually long commitment. I mean, then it comes out being 14 years altogether, so double that unusual commitment. And while he was trying to reflect his deep love for Rachel. Now, if you don't know what dowry means, let me give you I'll tell you what dowry means here. A dowry is traditionally the property, money, or valuable gifts that a bride's family gives to the groom or his family as part of a marriage arrangement. It's an ancient custom with deep cultural roots across Europe, South Asia, Africa, and other regions. And historically, dowries helped establish the couple's household, offered financial security for the bride, and symbolized goodwill between families. And the contents of the dowry could include cash, jewelry, furniture, land, livestock, or other assets. In Hindu traditions, the bride's family typically provides the dowry. In Muslim cultures, the groom may offer a gift to the bride instead. Um, yeah, the groom may offer a gift to the bride instead. And In some countries, dowries have been outlawed due to exploitation, financial coercion, or even violence tied to unpaid dowries. And the word dowry comes from the Anglo-Norman French um, word rooted in medieval Latin culture. It originally deferred to or rather, referred to a widow's entitlement from her husband's estate. And in modern times, while the practice has faded in many places, it still persists, and sometimes informally or symbolically. So there you have it on that. Let's get back to this. So the lessons we get from this is God sees the unseen. Leah felt unloved, but God saw her and opened her womb. So God saw her and opened her womb. And this reminds us that God values those overlooked by people. And then there's patience in God's timing. Jacob worked 14 years for Rachel, showing endurance for what he loved. Spiritually, it reflects waiting faithfully for God's promises also. And also beware of deception. Laban's trickery teaches discernment and warns about misplaced trust in people rather than God. And then God's sovereignty in imperfect situations. So, despite human sin, deception, and favoritism, God's redemptive plan continues unhindered. So, no matter the situation, now we can see things as impossible, but with God, all things are possible. All things. So, there you have it for this week. Genesis chapter 29. Jacob meets Rachel. I hope you gain something from this in relation to relationships, uh, having patience, waiting on God. So continue to renew your minds. So continue to renew your minds, said.